The other thing that we bring up on those is, are you seeing the patients you like? Is there somewhere you want to subspecialise, and how can we support you to do that? Because we want them to feel comfortable and happy and promote the things that they want to do more.
And just how happy are you in your work? Any suggestions for improving the place? We get them to fill out a questionnaire prior to the conversation, so they've had a bit of a think about their answers.
Welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm really excited today to present two amazing female and practice owners that we've had the good fortune of working with in Project X. And so Dr. Petrina Barson, Dr. Arete Kotouris, welcome.
Welcome.
Hi.
Now, both coming from, you are in Brunswick West, and it is Marybeck Family Doctors. I'm really curious to learn a little bit about the background, how you got into practice ownership in particular. Arete, I was going to throw to you just for a bit of context around that, and please include the special family book that you guys have read from a young age.
Okay, well, I come from a small business background, grew up in a small business background, and at the age of 10, I was given Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. We were all given that, and it was our challenge to find the secret to success. So I always was headed for my own destiny, my own business, did my medical training. In my late 20s, I became a silent partner for a very successful restaurant, and then we opened a second one, and that was great and exciting at the time, but I had no input into the business. Then I spent a year with another business in my 30s doing corporate health, and then I always wanted to set up my own practice, but I wanted to have my family first and have time to commit to the practice. So Petrina and I were working together, and when I went to that practice, I said, no, I'm here for a little bit, but when I'm ready, I'm leaving because I'll be setting up my own practice. So we knew that from the outset, and I was there a bit longer than I expected, but got to know Petrina very, very well at the time, and she always knew that that was where I was headed. And I think at one time, Petrina, I told you I was leaving soon to set up my own practice, and you said...
Well, I said, oh, that's a shame. You said.
And then I don't know what I said. You remember what I said, which is...
You said, well, I'm going to take you with me.
Yeah, and I did. So we then got serious about it and spent some time thinking, fleshing it out. Where are we setting up a practice? How are we going to do it? We sat down and worked through plans, thoughts, what we wanted, what we liked, what we didn't like, why we wanted to set up our own practice.
Over a fair few glasses of red wine.
Regular meetings with lots of red wine. Yeah, and then it became a little bit hard after a while, and we weren't sure how it was going to come about because, we had ideas of what we wanted, and it did become a little bit hard to get from there to reality. But one of the things that Scale My Clinic talk about, and obviously comes out from the Think and Grow Rich book as well, is you've got to network and talk to people. And I do medical acupuncture, and I learned that because of some great success from a doctor who was actually in this building many, many years ago. So when I met him at an acupuncture meeting, I said, oh, finally I meet you, and you actually have a clinic around the corner from my kids' taekwondo lessons, and I'm there all the time, and I just live in the neighbourhood. So later on, when he thought to sell, he immediately thought about me because he wanted somebody to look after his acupuncture patients, and he realised that being local, I'd be keen on the area. I took that to Petrina. We came and met up and saw the clinic and saw the potential in the building. It was a one practitioner clinic, and we've built it up since then, but we saw the potential and we just went with it.
Awesome. One practitioner. How many rooms though?
At the time, there were potentially 4 consulting rooms, but we've now built it to 7.
Right. Wow. So you've really taken a business asset that at the time was a single person working and built it out to a proper clinic in that time. I wonder if we could go back a little bit and just see if we can focus on that time that you were both exploring ownership and over different types of red wine. What's your preference with grapes for red wine? Well, that was easy to answer. Okay. We'll get back to the white grapes later. And so at these meetings, it sounds like you were creating your ideal future practice. Probably useful for people listening to hear a bit about the process and what was in your head in that space? Because you mentioned that what you wanted, it was difficult to find that. And then I'm really keen on just understanding where you are now as to compared to what it was that you thought you wanted then. So let's go back to those conversations. What were the frameworks you used? How did you think about it?
One of the main things that we both agreed on is that we wanted our own real estate. So we didn't want to lease rooms anywhere. We wanted our own real estate. So that was a big thing. And that made it difficult too, trying to find appropriate real estate in a city. We were looking at in Thornbury and picking places out that didn't quite weren't coming up. So it just became a little bit difficult. And the other thing we wanted was to control the culture from day one in the practice. And that's what we were a little unhappy with in previous places that we've worked.
And I think that was more my dream. So whereas Arete comes from a small business background, I wasn't always going to set up my own practice. I had probably a secret dream of it, but not the whole business aspect really. I've become a businesswoman rather than always being. And so I think for me it was about autonomy. So there was a moment when we were considering setting up where I very nearly bailed. I got very scared. I saw the potential for this thing to become a massive millstone around my neck. And so I stared at that possibility of bailing on the arrangement. But in the end, I decided that I could continue in someone else's clinic for the rest of my life, have no control over the culture, the employment, the decor, the computer systems, everything. Or I felt like it was actually a maturational step to grow up and be my own boss in that way and have the practice. So for me, it wasn't such a business decision. It was more a culture decision around, I want to have a practice that is our own. And I felt that in partnering up with Arete that we had a lot of similar values and aims, and we were in the same position in life. Our kids are similar ages, our husbands similar professions, which is they don't work.
Don't earn income. They work hard. They don't earn income.
Yeah, we need to be respectful.
So we're sort of complementary, but also similar in our life stages and aspirations. So it's a lot of things felt like they fell into place, really.
Yeah, awesome. And if we just explore that bit where you overcame that hurdle, where you had that momentary cold feet moment where you thought, oh, maybe this isn't for me, it could be a bit stressful. Did you walk yourself through that process of acceptance and then liking it, or was there some influence from Arete?
I'll just answer. The questioning that was triggered by someone else.
Was it?
Yeah.
I've forgotten.
Remember, somebody pulled you aside and said, are you sure you want to do this?
Well, probably a lot of people did. I think it was probably a pretty healthy process, really, of just taking stock of this and deciding what my priorities were. And yes, it just, in the end, it stopped being, say, a financial decision or even a reason, pros and cons decision. It just, the one thing that came through was I wanted to grow up, and this was an opportunity to do that.
Awesome. And so in 2014, you did that. You purchased the clinic as well as the real estate. Is that right?
Correct.
And then walk us through, what was that early bit like where you just walk in on day one? And I've done this a few times.
If you think about things that can happen, they did.
So the day one, we had wrong-footed by the length of time that it took for the settlement to occur. We've both bought and sold houses, but we've never bought and sold businesses before. And the business settlement just took forever. And so by the time we had access to the building, it was like 3 days before we were supposed to have our opening. We had patients.
Oh, wow.
We were knocking out walls, we were painting, it was just
bringing in computers.
Crazy. There was not a
and
computer.
phones.
There's not a computer or a decent phone in the whole place. Like, we had to bring it into the 21st century.
That's more than owning a
it
practice
was.
without the helpers.
But yeah, so we were putting doors on as patients were walking in, and we had a line of patients out the door because we'd taken over an existing practice. They had been waiting for the practice to reopen. So yeah, we were busy from day one, really. It was full on, and yes, we've had just about everything happen. We've had fraud in various different ways. We've had resident opposition. We've had a patient picketing up and down with a sign disparaging one of our doctors. Like, you name it, we've had it.
Yeah, we've had to get an intervention order out on a patient.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be laughing. This is anybody who does serious business in anything knows that there's a price of entry, and these things are sometimes just part of life, unfortunately. Could we just spend a little bit of time on the fraud and just extract what you think is useful lessons for people to know about, those who are thinking of becoming practice owners, or maybe they're owners already and they haven't yet been exposed to some of the less savoury parts of business ownership?
I'll comment on that. You've got to put your different hats on. So as a doctor, everybody's good and kind and you trust everyone. As a business owner, you need to dot your I's, cross your T's and just check that everything's happening. Assume that if you don't do that, assume the worst. I think different hats for different parts of your life.
One of the things I learned, sadly, this has also had something I've experienced a couple of times, is the phrase that's been most useful for me is trust but verify. And so one of the things that is most useful in a leadership meeting is just to say, can you show me that? And sometimes you'll get resistance to that. The other person might say, oh, I don't quite have it on me. The most powerful thing is to say is I can wait and pause the meeting until the evidence is produced. And I think just doing that at random times is useful. Was there anything else that you feel is a useful lesson to share before we move on to other parts of?
Yeah, we were just, well, two things. One is we were just so busy. This was in our first year. We were flat out seeing patients. And so we weren't paying enough attention to what our practice manager was doing. That's the truth. And we were new to the game and she knew it. But the funny story is that I got it into my head when we were interviewing staff that it would be a really good idea to get them all to do before that we interview them this test called reading the mind in the eyes, which is an empathy test. And it gives you it's a computerized test which gives you a letterbox slot shaped picture of someone's eyes. And you're supposed to be able to read the expression from the eyes, and the accuracy with which you can do that predicts empathy pretty well. And so we did that for the first few interviews, and it was interesting. And this woman who was our practice manager did really well on that. She scored very high on empathy. And that wasn't the reason why we employed her, but it was a factor. And sure enough, she was very empathic. She was very attuned to us, and she had us worked out completely.
Which is why she
was able to manipulate us extraordinarily well. She knew us and she had us wrapped around her little finger, full of sympathy for her plight and her many plights and her many disasters that kept on seeming to happen in her life, etc., etc. So, as I think what Arete says is right. We tend to, as doctors, we tend to be trusting. We take people's word for what they say, but we were being serially manipulated.
Yeah, that doctor mindset is not appropriate for leading, managing and holding others accountable, right? We have a high degree of tolerance because in medicine there's a lot of things that come to bear on people's health and they're not always able to control and influence those. So you need to approach that with understanding, empathy and tolerance, really. And so that doesn't work as well, though, in a high performance environment. And as you rightly point out, sometimes the way that people can manipulate you is through being highly empathic and understanding what your needs are and superficially catering to those needs. It's a little bit like the magician, right? One hand's doing one thing, distracting you, and the other hand's doing something else. Okay, well, let's move on from that phase. And then I'm really curious about just the first few years of growth, as how that went in the practice, what you found easy and what you found a challenge in those first few years.
We worked very hard. We were, like I said, initially we were doing 9 to 10 sessions a week each, and we only had a 2-doctor permit. We very quickly realised we had to get a bigger permit and start filling the clinic. So getting the permit through council was very challenging for us. And like Petrina mentioned earlier, we had a lot of opposition due to parking constraints and things like that. But then once we did, we worked on filling, stepping back so other people could come in and just filling the clinic to that level of permit. And then very quickly, as soon as we got that, we went for the 8-doctor permit, which we also had a lot of opposition, but we got through that one as well. And then we've been building and renovating and filling, and at the same time stepping back ourselves, because the aim is that we worked hard, we're working hard, but now we want to spend more time managing, running. We have a wonderful practice manager, but we're very involved now in the future and direction of the clinic and where we're going with it.
Awesome. Let's go back to the time when we met in Project X, in the community that we run the coaching. How long ago was that now?
I believe it was, we joined in February 2023.
But we met you at the end of 2022.
I was going to say, it feels like longer than that because I feel like I've known you both for a long time. If we go back to that time, actually, one thing I'd like to explore was what was on your mind when we went and had that call and that you decided to join. What were the things that were going through your mind at that period of time?
I think for me, it was that the business was going okay. We were paying our bills, but it wasn't, neither of us felt, I think, that it was realising its potential. And so I sort of felt a little bit like that decision to go into it in the first place. We could sit on this and we could just keep on puddling along, or we could actually give it more focus, and with the help of people who experience in this, we could boost it. And because we're not that far from retirement, really. I'm turning 60, Arete, too far behind me. No, I don't mind saying it. And so 5 years I'll be retired. And so we wanted to realise the asset before we retire.
And I think at that time I've been saying to Petrina, we're not business-minded enough. We need a business-minded input. And I just didn't know where to go with that. Should we look at business people and business coaching? And then you guys fell into our lap and we said, yeah, these are business coaches who know general practice and can speak our language. So
and then what were the priorities for you when you joined? What were the things that you thought, okay, these are the things we're going to get right? And how did you go with that?
We knew we had a wonderful practice. We knew our patients loved us. We knew roughly where to go. But we also knew that we weren't really doing the business side of things as well as we could. So we've kept all the good things and just tried to improve that business side of things, which we've been doing that in leaps and bounds since we started with you guys. And we've gone back and looked at some graphing and we look at the change. Oh yeah, that's when we joined Scale My Clinic. That's when they told us to do this. That's when we did that. And so we can see all the changes as a response to all the things that we did through doing the coaching with you guys. So that's been very rewarding.
We've tried to, when we're coaching people, we try to have a focus on projects. So as that, there's two things really in life. There's business as usual, which is often 80% of what we do, and then there's improvement projects. What do you think are the improvement projects that have made the biggest difference to the clinic and yourself personally?
Recruitment and CDM. So assisting us with getting our focus right with recruitment. So talking about discerning who's our avatar in terms of doctors, and encouragement to get content out there and then improving chronic disease management processes so that they are perceived by the patients and doctors as being clinically useful and therefore increasing the uptake both in our own practices but also across the clinic.
And have you got, again, share whatever you're comfortable with sharing, but have you got some comparative data about we started here and we ended up here with any of those that sound relevant? I mean, I think you said earlier that the clinic's pretty well at capacity. So do you measure GP consulting hours or sessions? How do you measure what is currently being provided in the practice from GP consulting and then also CDM?
Well, we're about to be at full capacity. That's happening in the next 2 weeks. So we haven't quite got there yet, but that's happening with our new recruit in the next 2 weeks. And we've been measuring our CDM percentage, which has been going up. I think it's doubled, but we feel like we have more to go there. We've been measuring our FTE, so with the hours worked, the FTE. What else are we measuring?
Those are probably the main things. Yeah. The CDM percentage has gone up, but the CDM amount has gone up more because our overall billings have gone up.
Correct. And the other thing that we've done and worked on is helping our doctors bill better. So our doctor hourly sessional rate has gone up too. So these are the things we've been working with game plans, and we're
awesome. All the little levers. What about the function of the team? So this can be sometimes a little bit harder to measure, but just the alignment and performance of employees and non-employees. So GPs, we call them lots of different things, but independent GPs is probably the best way of describing them. They're not employees, of course. How would you rate those relationships and the functioning of those teams over the last few years?
I think we've always been very fortunate with culture, especially receptionists, management, nurses. I think we haven't had big problems there, except with our first practice manager. And so regarding, say, chronic disease management, that's involved a lot of conversations with the nurses and to help them understand. And actually one of the turning points was being able to help them understand why this was important for business survival. We are surrounded by a lot of practices that are completely private billing, and we've maintained a mixed billing. And in order to compete with the others for doctors, we have to be able to show our doctors that they can earn decently here. And so the nurses have come to understand that you're helping us stay open by doing this chronic disease.
Yeah, and that's a great message for health equity in the local area as well.
That's right.
All of us agree that the MBS rebates don't really represent the value of the work delivered, nor have they been appropriately indexed to inflation. However, the fact that you can provide that mixed billing does mean that you're going to really have people unable to access the right care. And so well done on that.
I was going to say, so that was part of the message too, that you're enabling us to stay open and continuing to look after Mrs. Smith, who we've been looking after all these years, Mr. Gianopoulos. And I guess the other aspect is with our doctors, we ran a series of what we call Flourish Conversations each year to talk to them one-on-one about their well-being and how they're happy they are. And also wrapped into that is a focus on billing and how they're going. And we give them a lot of data. We give them fortnightly data on their hourly billing rate. But in these Flourish Conversations, we give them data on how they're going, and we give them benchmark and suggestions and support.
Now, if anybody's listening to this in their car, I encourage you to pull over, take out a pen or open your notes app and just write that down, Flourish Conversations. I think that sounds a lot better than a billing conversation. And so that's a great bit of marketing on just exactly how you open that conversation. It would be really useful, I think, for people listening and watching to understand what exactly is in that conversation. You mentioned you share data every 2 weeks. How frequently do the Flourish Conversations happen? And what else are you covering in that conversation?
They've been once a year, but formally once a year, but we're trying to also make sure we have informal conversations more often.
The other thing that we bring up on those is, are you seeing the patients you like? Is there somewhere you want to subspecialise, and how can we support you to do that? Because we want them to feel comfortable and happy and promote the things that they want to do more.
And just how happy are you in your work? Is there any suggestions for improving the place? We get them to fill out a question, also a questionnaire prior to the conversation, so they've had a bit of a think about their answers.
That's a great model, priming the conversation just before you have it. So is that they're thinking about the right things, just so you're not discovering what's going on in their head at the actual conversation. They get to prepare for it. That's an excellent hack. Is there anything else you're doing like that in regards to the rest of the team?
Well, we have monthly meetings with the nurses around CDM to just find out from them how they're going and try and support them to feel happy. So, for instance, in the recent meeting, I think we did well to appoint one of them as the 10997 Queen, one of them as the Health Assessment Queen, and one of them as the, I don't know, what was the other one? I forget. We wrote them down. So they all embraced those roles as, right, okay, well, I'm going to monitor this. We didn't appoint them, they
took it on, chose what they wanted to monitor for us.
Yeah.
I love it. So in my head, you're knighting or anointing these people with special titles at the monthly meeting. I hereby grant you the title of Lord or Queen.
They told me I was the COVID vaccination queen, so that's where it started.
Fantastic. It's only fair to have a House of Queens. I think that's an awesome upgrade. Now, we've talked a little bit about the external observable things. So the building's getting a little bit bigger, the team's getting bigger, you're recruiting both patients and GPs that are aligned with your avatars, and you've got a really clear idea about all of that. Let's talk a little bit more about the things that people can't observe, the internal change in both of you. So, Petrina, you sounded like you're a little bit less confident about things back in 2014 at least, but I'd love to just walk through a little bit of the emotional journey of what has this done for you both in terms of your business lives and your lives outside of business.
I'm just going to make a little comment. Petrina has certainly found her business head, so she's wonderful now with that.
Yeah, well, I'm endlessly grateful that I did not balk at that fence, that I did go ahead.
Just on that note, at the time I said to Petrina, well, I'm doing it. You can come along or not, but I'm still doing it. And I think you asked earlier, did I say anything or did we have a conversation? I think that helped. Yeah, she didn't want to miss out.
Yeah, I had FOMO big time. But, so I am very grateful that I did not walk. And, I love it. I think I love it more than you.
No,
because
she loves it.
Being a natural pessimist, I'm always surprised when things go well. Whereas Arete's an optimist, and she's forever whinging about when things aren't going well. So Is that
Well,
right?
that's actually that's a great business partnership, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's easy for people to find appeal in the optimists, but we wouldn't have survived the ice age if they were running out in their shorts and t-shirt, because the pessimists to say, well, I'll just pack for cold weather. We don't know, it might change. And without those people, we probably wouldn't be here today to be talking about these things. So it is a really good yin and yang combo. What about the things that so feeling more confident about your abilities? In my experience, that does play out in other parts of life. So I'm really curious as to what difference that made for you, maybe in who you talk to outside or just your standing in the communities that you're in. What difference has that made outside of the clinic?
Well, firstly, I think that running a clinic has enormous opportunities for creativity. And so I feel that I've developed in that way in terms of just having to problem solve, having to dream up ideas, some of which work, some of which don't. But nevertheless, just the canvas on which to do that has been great. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think also those who know me know that I don't promote myself much. I'm very backseat, but getting on this and running the clinic and learning and understanding more about business, I've looked at the things that I traditionally would not do, like perhaps this podcast, and I've said, no, I can do it all. So I'll speak to people now, I'll speak on a stage now, I'll podcast, and I'll put my hand up for a leadership role. So for me, that's been a big growth. And once again, I say I'll put my big girl boots on and do the things that traditionally I wouldn't have done.
And I think also it's got me feeling a bit more embedded in the profession, because when you're I shouldn't say that, but when you're functioning as an independent practitioner, you're not having to think too much about the politics or the organisational aspects of general practice. And so I feel more like a GP than I did. I felt like I was a clinician then, but now I feel like I'm a bit more the full
round. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I personally believe there's no better business development tool than business, because, as you said, you do go through the full gamut of emotions in running a business. And I really love your point about the opportunity to exercise creativity in the business environment. One of the things that's really noticeable about the community in Project X is the willingness to experiment and be okay with failure. Not all experiments work out. And so we don't get too wed to the outcomes with trying things. Have you noticed that? You tend to hold things less strongly, that you're more willing to experiment and try things out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Depends on the context.
Yeah, it depends on the context.
Occasionally that might be a Chardonnay rather than a Pinot Noir. What do you think is next for both of you? And I think it's really important that people understand the background, that not only have you created business value, but in owning the property, you've got two assets going forward. What's next for you both?
We are still working on getting to the pinnacle of this particular business and asset. So we are planning on doing a little bit of an extension renovation so that we've got an 8 practitioner permit, we've got 7 rooms. We just want to get to realise the full potential of the asset.
Forward planning, I guess, for making an exit in 5 years-ish time. So trying to work out what's the most advantageous and gracious way of doing that, in terms of trying to pass the baton if we can, or what sale would that mean, or what do we do with. I tend to feel that we've created a baby here and I'd like it to continue to live after us. But in what form that will be, that's hard to predict.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably more like a young adolescent than a baby now, because it can stand up and walk and fend for itself somewhat. If we go back to, I didn't ask you, how long was the practice owned prior to you both buying it? How long it ran as a single practitioner?
Yeah, I think it was from 87, so till 2014.
Wow, so nearly 30 years. And I think this is really useful for people to understand. So for 30 years, somebody owned an asset. This is not a value proposition on the asset or a commentary on the person, but just that it was owned and it never really grew beyond that size of one practitioner. 2 people with motivation, enthusiasm, and willingness to get the work done, and a bit of guidance along the way, have really built that to what is currently maximised asset, or within 2 weeks it'll be maximised. And then there's probably a little bit more to squeeze out of that over the next 3, 4, 5 years before looking for an exit. It's a huge difference in the utilisation of that space, but not just in terms of a financial return, but also in terms of the services offered to the community. An 8-fold increase in those services is huge. So I really want to applaud that and just shine a spotlight on that. Well done to both of you for making such a big impact in what's an inner suburb, right? It's not easy to build big things in inner suburbs because there's not a lot of real estate generally to do that with. And so that's really exciting. There's still a lot to come based on listening to both of you. I really love that. And I think all of us have a really big responsibility. The latest Health of the Nation report, the 2024 one, said that only 10% of GPs coming through the system now are interested in practice ownership. And so that's been a theme for us in Project X to tell these stories. It's one of the reasons that we're here today, sharing your wins. Now, somebody listening to this might think, well, I'm a GP and I'd really love to work with these awesome people. So they just need to look up Dr. Petrina Barson and Dr. Arete Kotouris, and you'll be able to find them at their practice. If there's some awesome GP that thinks, yeah, I'd love to work with these two, then that's an opportunity potentially for you. And maybe somebody says, you know what, I'd like to part with them and open something else. If that comes your way, then we'll make sure they can find you easily. I'm super grateful for both of you today sharing your time, your wisdom, and your expertise with the audience. I have one last question for both of you. If you had something to share with your younger self, what would it be?
I think get in earlier. I think I should have the first business I should have gotten involved with should have been investing in myself and getting into general practice earlier. I would have done that.
Mine would be, don't worry, it's going to be fun.
That's with the small stuff. Don't worry, you'll all be okay in the end. Well, that's a beautiful way to finish up. Thank both of you, and we'll finish that episode. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Thanks, Todd.
Right, thank you.